I assume you gave some thought to the placement. Having the mass of humanity live in a mental dream state of uncontrolled distraction, fragmentation, and uncertainty, forever plotting impossible goals and clinging to dead ideas serves to keep them on the measured, moderate move, and is thus, at the collective level, a useful and practical arrangement. But for an individual wanting to change his own condition, life therein in no wise offers anything useful. After some number of years pursuing a certain construction trade, a man one day suddenly and finally was struck with a stark realization. It is possible to build a ladder, and only one thing can stop you: not remembering to build it. A man once asked a mystic, what is the greatest threat to one undertaking the quest? Being weak or having a bad memory? And the mystic was loath to reply, there being such little ground between the two. One man says he was recently struck with a new definition of his mind. He says he now thinks of it as my ancestral talk machine. Criticism and condemnation only have value when they are properly directed, and at the ordinary level, they rarely are. For to inveigh against man's failure to do things impossible is to heap distraction on top of illusion. Mystical ideas never condemn or accuse. They simply tell a man that he could be more than he is. After that, it is you who must accuse yourself. The turmoil of growth disorients enlightened onlookers. Two facts, and then a question. The facts. 'Tis a real fool who can rail against sleep while he himself doth sleep. And no man has ever reached his full potential. Now the question. In what order would you prefer to hear these facts? Two men once approached a mystic requesting that he take them under his guidance. And he told them that they must first write for him a history of their lives. And one man gave an account of the events that had happened to him in his life, while the other reported what he had thought and felt about what had happened to him. And the mystic allowed only one of them to stay. How do you see the history of your life? The common mind speaks much of political, economic, and social freedom, while ignoring the true nature of man's enslavement. After some years of studying the complex interconnections of things, one engineer finally asked himself, does man the machine operate improperly or just inefficiently? A man once asked a mystic, is the greatest hindrance to one pursuing the secret being ignorant of much or not making constant use of what he does know? And the mystic was reluctant to reply, there being so little practical difference between the two. One man changed his mind's name to Headgorder, thinking that perhaps the establishment of a physiological excuse might bring about an improvement in his condition. And surprisingly enough, it did. And if you don't really much want to think about this one, I understand. There was once a race of men who saw the two forces of good and evil not as in conflict, but rather as evil being an offspring of good, existing for the purpose of reminding men of the good. Now this one you should be able to handle and ponder on. How to tell that men are becoming more conscious of themselves? Some now look out at mass human movements and speculate as to whether or not men are actually in control of their collective destiny as they generally believe. That was a joke, you said. I mean, them looking at other people to come up with such a notion. Funny, huh? One father's advice to his son: never say anything that anyone else has already said. And above all, never think anything. It's not just the traffic itself, he added, that'll kill you, but its banality as well. Men dedicated to changing events remain servants of events. Only the few seem ever suspect that all that is possible is to change oneself. Mystical ideas always contain both an inner and an outer message, and the hearer can take whichever he needs. In contrast, popular ideas never have an inner message. One myth says that on your ultimate day of judgment, as you wait in line to be judged, that you're given a small stone to hold in your hand until your time comes. And when it does, and you're brought before the bar of judgment, you're asked only one question: did you remember all the time you were in line that you were holding the stone? According to legend, the head of one mystical school once said to those struggling therein, "If you can just hold on for 8 more years." And they asked, "After that, what?" And he replied, "Hold on for 8 more. And after that, they asked, "Another 8, he replied. Real guilt is not natural. It's not a natural nor easy thing. One must work to achieve it. One man says that for years he fought the forces of evil, battled the bastions of darkness, waged war against injustice, and wrestled mightily with his own mechanical nature. And now says it's down to one great challenge: the struggle to get his toilet to flush correctly. One day, the head of a certain mystical school suddenly turned to a group of those therein and unexpectedly said to them, "As much fun as laughter can be, it can also operate as a wasteful and undesirable pressure valve for those in the heat and heart of the active effort." And no one found that very funny. The commotion surrounding change causes confusion among uninitiated observers. For whatever possible use there may be for any common idea, it may be taken at face value with no thought about it on your part. While with mystical ideas, it is just the opposite. Unless you do think about them for yourself, they are useless. Fish swim and swim, birds fly and fly. Man sees it all, then sits and wonders why. Below our feet is land, above our heads is sky. It all seems well arranged, still man keeps asking why. Everything is born and everything doth die. It's all as plain as day, yet man still keeps asking why. At first, the asking of the why seems natural and proper enough, but some men reach the point they wish their mind would just shut up. Everything is as it is, they want it to say, but know as sure as hell they do, it's going to ask them why. The upside to being asleep is that if you never become aware that men live in a dream, then yours seems to be your own individual dream. A man once asked a mystic, "What is there in a man that can actually be changed?" And the mystic replied, "What do you think there is?" As he stepped back on land, coming back from the sea, the sailor shook his head in horror, saying, "It is really rough out there." But ahead, the bow of his frontal lobes just laughed in mocking ridicule. Maxim update for the few. That which does not make me stronger does worse. It makes me more ordinary. At all times there exist two major classes of myths regarding man's present condition. One says that he was once better than he is now, while the other professes that his best days are still ahead of him. Note the absence of any which proclaim that he could essentially improve himself now. The speaker addressed the assembled. Each diamond in a basket of diamonds sees itself reflected in every other diamond. And a voice from the crowd shot back, "Yeah, just try telling that to my mind." And the rest of the mob added, "Yeah." Images seen through the dust of turmoil and confusion always appear hazy, dull, and uncertain, which is not the world that is actually out there. One day, a certain man sat with chin in hand and seriously pondered. How is it possible to know something with absolute certainty for 40 years and yet half the time forget that you know it? But he knew the answer to that. Being human makes it possible. Yet being so also makes available additional possibilities. This awareness almost causing shift of chin to other hand. A man once asked one more conscious how he could better understand the difference between religious ideas and mystical ones, and received this reply: religious ideas do not expect you to act on them, while mystical ones do. The only help that ordinary men can give to one another will not help them rise above the ordinary. One man says that some years back he offered up a public epitaph of our species, which went, "Man, he dreams of angels while lying with pigs," which he says at the time he considered not only clever, but somewhat of an understatement. He says that now, however, he'd like it withdrawn from circulation. After many years of reading and thinking on the matter, one man became an expert and commentator on all the many paths to enlightenment. Then he died and thought, "Thank God." Common behavior comes from the belly of man. Common ideas from the natural mind of man. Mystical ideas come from somewhere else altogether, yet not someplace unavailable to man. To believe that something is more demanding than it actually is helps keep the ordinary from demanding much of themselves. A man once asked a mystic, "What is the difference between failing and not trying?" In its desire to remain secret and invisible, one mystical school gave itself the name, "You can't possibly do this." One man reached the place of knowing so much that he was not impressed with how much he knew. One man says he now looks on his mind as a mere go-between, between ignorance and even more ignorance. Here's the original version, if it makes any difference. One man says he now looks at his mind as a mere go-between, between stupidity and even more stupidity. I just wanted to hear how it sounded. Once seen for what it is, what it does, and its far-reaching embrace, you understand that the only real shame in being enslaved is in not realizing it. If there is not something you can do alone that pleases you, without the need for anyone else to know about it, then you have nothing that is under your independent control. and you are not active in the struggle to change. A man once visited a mystic and asked him, "Is man complex?" And the mystic replied, "Yes," and the man left. A year later, the man returned to the mystic and asked him, "Is man simple?" And the mystic replied, "Yes," and the man left again. A year after that, the man returned once more and asked the mystic, "Is man complex?" And the mystic replied, "Yes." And as the man was walking out the door, the mystic called out, "Come again." In one legend, the king of death was also the guardian to the gate of awakening and liberation. From a pretty harmless view, you could say that it is a theoretical shame for ordinary men not to make the effort needed to realize their full potential, and from a less harmless one, say that it is indeed a true shame for a man who knows what he's capable of not to do so. A man asked a mystic, "If you're weak, is it better to never know than to know?" And the mystic replied, "Is it not too late to ask?" One father gave his son this stern warning: "Never plead with higher powers for help when you have not done all for yourself that you can do." And the boy asked, "Why? Is there some sort of supernatural danger involved?" And the elder replied, "No, but it makes you look like a fool." There's another unknown story about a head of a mystical school somewhere long ago that had been involved with it most of his life, and one day thought to himself, pondered to himself, which was the bigger burden, the more hopeless task. The young who showed up there, who already thought they knew it all, who didn't actually know enough that you could talk to them seriously, or those who had really been around the activity for so long that they thought they knew it all and actually did not have enough energy left to hear anything new. He also wanted me to, if I repeated the story, he always also wanted me to point out to you the validity, the possible useful validity of that applied to yourself. There are many people that turns out that have read some of what I've written publicly and have watched these tapings now, who have been involved many times with the edges of what they consider to be some sort of mystical activity, some sort of transcendental discipline. And many of them feel as though they have missed the plane somewhere, that they want to express how exuberant they were at one time over the idea of enlightenment, awakening, some sort of liberation. And they are, is not uncommon, as some of you know, they are quite prepared, in fact anxious, to recount the number of places they've been, the number of teachers or methods and schools and et cetera that they have been through, and primarily to relay the number of failures they have experienced, the disappointments after the initial enthusiasm. I reported tonight a story of a man who thought, was it not simply amazing to know something he said 40 years, so you can guess how old he was. To know something with absolute certainty for 40 years and yet half that time, forget about it. As I started to point out last time, and I will continue tonight, every mystical discipline, not excluding the simpler, cruder public versions, that is, of religion, they all amount to one thing, and that is attempting to hold a small stone in your hand continually. That all prayer, all meditation, for those of you that want to consider it, it is the neurological, the minor faux neurological effect produced by some drugs that seems to stabilize a person's attention, that seems to focus it in such a way that they can hold some idea for an extraordinary length of time, which for an ordinary person amounts to like 3 seconds. The sad humor of that being that it's a hell of a price to pay to subject your neural system to the ravages of drugs only for that which amounts to no more than a man can do for 2 or 3 seconds while doing himself no damage physically. But all of the disciplines amount to someone handing you a stone and saying, all right, hold this all the time, everywhere you go. Just hold it. Just be aware that you're holding it. There is a difference, an absolute difference. Well, let me put it another way. That is not being able to do that. Attempting to do that, undertaking that, is not the same thing as having the scimitar of enlightenment fall upon your skull and open it up to a direct perception of reality. It is not that. They are not the same thing. But until the sword happens to fall, a man has got to do something, or else he is doing nothing. And if he is doing nothing, the day will never arrive. What is almost impossible for someone to remember, even who may have been around such as this for 40 years, let's say. Now, we'll clarify, they're in the same position. If someone has, to varying degrees, sort of stuck with this for 40 years, without us interpreting to how sincere they were and how intelligent, etc. But if someone stayed with this and considered that they were involved with activities such as this, not just what I might be doing, but in some sort of activity such as this, then they would say that they have known something of some value, absolutely, with certainty for 40 years, but if they were still capable of uttering something other than dreams and illusions, recounting illusions, they would agree with the man I reported on. They would say, yes, there are some things, or what I first heard, what first struck me when I ran across this. I still remember that I recognized it immediately as being what I was looking for, and I recognized the absolute validity, the genuineness of what it was about, and my belief in that, my conviction of that, my certainty of that has never faltered. And yet they would agree with the man tonight that I know it, I've known it for 40 years, but yeah, he's right. About half the time, I forget about it. So there's nothing extraordinary. There's nothing worthy of blanket condemnation. The real truth of it is, although most people are not confronted with it, whatever they find through a book or through some available so-called mystical system of some sort, what they're not presented with is the fact that the reality behind the transcendental ideas, the mystical ideas, is in no wise a censure of man. It does not condemn man. And that is so strange that, in fact, if they had heard it, in fact, those who first get their taste of it through reading, I'm just assuming that they most likely found it through something widespread such as from the Buddhist literature, from the Hindu, from the Vedic scriptures, even from the Bible. It's all right there. But the mind is not wired up. Man's psychology, as it naturally is not wired up to even hear it in the beginning. By hearing it, I mean to hear the fact the Bible does not start out. Buddha did not start out, at least what is remembered. Muhammad didn't say that the angel of God says, listen to my words and repeat them. They didn't start out saying, okay, man, look, up until now you've done all right. That is not the heralding cry. That is not the call to worship of any religion. It will not bring a crowd of anyone, sane or sober. You cannot draw an assembly of reasonably mentally alert people by saying, hear ye, I have an important, or it could be an important, interesting message. And people show up, and you go, well, let me start off by saying, everything that you've done thus far is just fine. Everything's fine. You better keep the tempo really fast after that, or people are just immediately, if they do not physically walk away, they just lose interest. That tells people nothing. And even if they consider it at the intellectual level, just momentarily, they would find it untrue. They would find it, I guess untrue is the safest way, because ordinary sane people do not feel like everything they've done up till now is all right. So normally they do not even hear it, or they assume that you meant something else, or they assume that they misheard it, or they assume that you're some kind of probably libertinish crackpot, that you're going to follow it up by saying, yes, we should all just follow our own whims and do anything we want to, and it doesn't make a damn. There is no standard by which to judge what man does, and it just doesn't make a shit, so everything you've done's fine. And of course there are little small groups throughout history that do form around an idea such as that, but that's not what we're talking about. That is even outside the fringes of the middle class mentation of man. But the people will not take the message at face value. They will not ponder it to any depth. They will not ponder any possible significance to it. That is, if you told people, if you said, I have something that you might find of interest, but first let's establish this. I've got to give you the proper premise, or the premise for you from which you can obtain the most from my further comments, and that is this. Up till this point, and we're not talking about just your behavior, because everybody's behavior goes against some norm at some time. And so but if I said to them, your inner life, what you consider to be just your inner life up until now, all of the thoughts you've had, all the feelings you've had toward yourself, toward other people, up until now, all of that is not worthy of any condemnation. There's no shame to be attached to it. You have not erred in any way up until this point, you or anybody. And if I hesitate, or if I say, well, think on that for a second before I continue, and people really tried to think, what I'm trying to say is, for some reason, they just took my word for it for the moment. If I could in some way insist that this is potentially of interest, and they go, okay, I'll try. What does the ordinary mind make of that? Nothing. Because the ordinary mind, the mind of an ordinary, sane, everyday person, rejects that. It is constructed in such a way to reject it, because the mind is an unfinished product. A sane mind, as I pointed out, it's known out in the ordinary marketplace, although it's not recognized as to why this is true. But the sign of a sane mind is to be dissatisfied, or to ask a sane person. That's proof of sanity, to say, are you perfect? Any sane person will reject that, but then if you begin to shade the meanings of it, and you go, well, are you completely satisfied with your inner life? Are you satisfied with your personality, your psychology? No. That is taken as a sign of good mental health, for you to say, no, I am not totally healthy mentally. Do you find, by and large, complete favor with yourself? Not your looks, not your wealth, and all that, but what you think, how you feel, your attitude toward life, the way you perceive the structure of reality to be, I mean, do you find it satisfactory? If they thought you were asking it seriously, they'd go, well, certainly not. They might even add, well, no one but someone deranged or a criminal mind or someone with a personality, mental disorder would agree to what you just said. Well, certainly I don't. Things are not perfect yet. Things are not even acceptably, or not to a minimally acceptable level. Huh. That's the way it's supposed to be. And so if you try and tell an ordinary person, a sane ordinary person, that their inner life up to this point deserves no shame, no condemnation, everything has been a right, it's just foolishness. It's useless. Consider, on the other hand, let me point out, religion being the primary spokesman for it, not being a culprit, it's simply working for life like politics and everything else. But look at what holds religion together. The whole point, the whole basis, the whole hook of religion is condemnation. It's nobody's fault. It's not religion's fault, and no religion's any worse than the other. But that is all they have to offer. Religious ideas. And when I say religion, don't just start thinking about some particular religion. Let me change it back to religious ideas, which are, in a sense, crude, mystical ideas. They're mystical ideas that people can deal with, ordinary people. They become religious. What do they amount to? Making you feel guilty. And as I've asked before, some of you should, off on your own, considered what's afoot that anybody on this planet, if they're sane, can be made to feel guilty with about that much effort. I mean, you don't have to sit and plot, and you don't have to ask them to fill out a questionnaire to try to figure. First you might think, if you were from another planet and heard about the idea of guilt and making people want to hang their head and be ashamed, and if you were talking about the planet Earth and you said, well, most of the creatures, you would be referring to insects and mammals, and you said, nobody's ever heard of shame, but there's the creatures that seem to be running the thing, and you can go to one of them and just look at them and go, bad boy. And all of them, or all of them that seem to be part of the mainstream, they'll go, oh. And if you're from another planet and heard all this, what in the hell would you make of that? At first you'd probably want to say, well, I guess you probably find some specific characteristic of each individual. No, it's not necessary. Because you'd think, well, if that would work, you would have to. If they all had apparently individual personalities, that you would need an extensive questionnaire, maybe have to talk to them a while, just assuming you were sharp enough to finally figure out what it was about them that they didn't like about themselves, and then jump on them. That's not necessary. Look, religions, they just send out, the religious ideas, they just send out a blanket call to one area. They say, hear ye, show up. God's, the higher force has sent me to address you with an important message. And all the people show up in one area of the earth at one time. This whole group, they show up and they go, what is it? God said that you people are terrible. And every one of them. They don't have to begin to do it, individually. Every one of them goes, oh. And it sticks. At any rate, think about it. Regardless of the other social cohesive purposes it serves, we're all aware of that. Religion does other things, primarily of holding the social fabric together and supporting collective civilized behavior to override the barbaric survival kind of instincts of the individual. And it does all that through all kinds of ceremonies and death rituals, and we all know that. But when you get to the ideas of it, what are the ideas of religion? They amount to nothing other than feel bad, to make you feel guilty. And it goes no further. Ordinary people do not ask for any more, they don't deserve any more, they don't need any more, and so everything is just right. What makes mystical ideas? By that I include God knows how many things. What sets it absolutely apart and makes it difficult for people to even grasp in the beginning, it starts from an entirely other basis, which is that if you do not realize that you can do better, you can't do any better. And if better chokes ordinary people, if you don't realize that you can be other than you are, then you can't be other than you are. And so for some religion to say, well, if you cannot do so-and-so, then shame on you. If you cannot live by our teaching, then shame on you. And you take it, or that is, you look at it and you think, well, I can't, then it is shame on you. There is nothing more. You are accepting the fact that you cannot change. And the way things are arranged at the ordinary level, as we know, you're not supposed to change. Religious ideas forgive you, or whatever the religion is forgives you, because you say, well, I can't do that. I tried. And they go, well, good boy. None of us can. That shows that now you're that you are a faithful follower. You now see the light. You understand that you can't do anything, and that you do feel guilty about it, don't you? And you go, well, hell yeah, I do. I mean, I came here looking for something, some way to improve myself. I came here looking for the secret to life, and I was impressed. I like you, and I like the other people around here. I like the structure. I like the music. I like it all. But as soon as you told me what was involved, what I had to do, I realized I couldn't do it. I didn't want to say anything that first day, but I just knew. I went away and tried it because I was so impressed with the idea of it. And they smile and go, good, good. Well, it shows that you understand. It's sort of an initial test to find out you can't do it. And he goes, well, I can see that. I suspected that as soon as I heard it. And you go, yeah, but the church would say, the religious ideas would say, and now the main thing is, you do feel guilty about it. Oh, well, hell yeah, I feel horrible about it. I'm ashamed. It sounded so simple. So let's say the general one, love your fellow man as yourself, or do no one else any harm. As soon as I heard, a man's mind says, as soon as I heard that, I thought, that is the secret. What it is that seemed empty in me up until now, what it is that seemed, I couldn't put my hand on it, but as soon as you said that the whole point to being a whatever, a Buddhist, Muslim, Jew, Christian, was to be able to do no other creature, no other human harm. As soon as I heard that, I went, yes. I mean, it just struck me. It wasn't just words. And people, I'm not making fun of this. It strikes people. Many people initially, there's no secret about that, that their first blush, they feel their first physical brush with the mystical is in religion. As soon as they get old enough to have some conception, whether it's their forefathers' religion or they go seek out another one, they feel like this has got to be it. This has got to be where the secret's hiding. Because you look around, it's obviously, I mean, you just don't expect it to be in politics or sports, or you just look around, it's obvious, there's no secret. If it's anywhere out here in life, the church has got to be sitting on it. It's got to be there within religion. And so you hear, just to use that common one again, that the whole trick is to do no other human any harm. And people go, yes, and they feel a sensation. It's not just words, they feel, yes, that's it. And according to their degree of insight, they're almost immediately struck by the extreme improbability of them being able to do this. But notice what the position you're in then. If you still take that to some heart, if you still feel as though that has genuine promise, that it is based upon something extraordinarily real, think how you should feel sort of shameful. And you go back and you say, well, I can't do it. What's the trick? And you find out the church has no trick. They're religious ideas. If I keep saying the church, I'm talking about the ideas. It's not in a particular group. But it's, in a sense, as I said, the mystical ideas, the transcendental ideas taken down to a public, crude, common, popular level, one that ordinary people can deal with. Then you go back and say, well, I can't do it. I have no doubt you're correct. That as soon as I heard you say that, as soon as I heard the idea, I knew that was it. But I cannot seem to do it. What's the trick? And you find out that there is no trick. You find out the people that told you that, the ideas themselves, as I put to you in one of the papers tonight, I turned it, if you notice, to religious, I spoke to the ideas themselves rather than religion. It said that a man asked a mystic, what is the actual difference between religious ideas and mystical ideas? I started to write it, if you'll catch the point here, but I was giving you people a little more credit, at least going to try to strain you some. At first, when I was sitting there and I was about to write it down, was a man asked a mystic, what's the difference in, what is the true difference between religion and mysticism? And the mystic said, well, religion does not expect you to execute, to be able to fulfill their ideas, whereas mysticism does. Well, see, that turns the action of doing it, which is all mysticism is. It's not a thing, it's not a place, it's not a person. It's action, it's not a noun. But that would have been the easiest way to present to ordinary people, even if they didn't get much out of it other than they thought it was sort of a clever turn of words, maybe a small-time proverb of some kind. But I attempted to make it more enriched and a little more difficult, or simple to grasp according to what you're up to, was I had the man ask the mystic, what is the difference between religious ideas and mystical ideas? And the more conscious one said, well, religious ideas do not expect you to execute them. They're just there. They're never expected to be fulfilled. Because back to my story, my illusionary, my little tale, you hear the idea of do no harm to anyone else. So you go back and you say, I'm sure that's it. And I've been trying, I've just been in a daze. I have just been so enthused. I'm so happy I met you and came here. But I'm going to tell you the truth. As convinced as I am of the validity of what you said, that somewhere in there is the answer to what I've been seeking, I cannot do it. And I can't even imagine me being able to do it. What's the trick? In the religious ideas, or to make the tale grammatically viable, you ask the guy, the priest, the rabbi, whoever told you, the guru. You say, well, what's the trick? You sold me on the idea, now how to do it. And the guru said, well, there is no trick, none of us can do it. Most people, that's the end of it. But I was about to do a little dramatics, trying to represent a potentially wired up real mystic. They may still wander away because it may have happened to you at the age of 14, 15. You got, what else are you going to do? You don't know where to turn after that. You thought you had found the secret. You thought you had found the Messiah. You thought you had found the harbingers, the keepers of the secret. And here it is, the figure that you thought had it. He looks you dead in the eye and sort of smiles like, well, good going. You realize you can't do it. You go, well, yeah, good going, hell, but what's the trick? Now, tell me the trick. I took off a week and tried it. He goes, oh, there is no trick. Nobody can do it. He wants to shake your hand or say, well, sign up here because that shows that you are a good Jew or Christian or whatever. Well, they first asked what I did before. He says, well, none of us can do it. There's no trick. We just can't do it. And you think, he goes, but here's the point. Here's the benchmark. Do you feel ashamed that you can't do it? No. And you think, well, hell yeah. Shame would be one word. Extremely irritated, frustrated. But at least if they would, normally the religious ideas are presented on the basis of, well, do you feel ashamed about it? Do you feel guilty that you can't do it? And you think, well, that guilt doesn't hardly begin to cover it. But yes, I feel guilty. I feel shame that I can't. Because I hear the validity. It strikes me way beyond my mind that is, somewhere in there is the secret. Somewhere in there is the cure. Somewhere in there is my completion. Somewhere in there is my promised land, my kingdom of God. Somewhere in there is the platonic brighter world, the real world, not the world of shadows. I know it's in there, so yes, I'm convinced of that. And you find there is no trick. And he says, well, do you feel guilty not being able to do it? And you go, yeah. And suddenly they won't shake your hand and say, well, sign right up. It proves you are good potential religious material. And that's the end up with most people. But think about it a second, if you have to. Is always, in the ordinary perceived world based upon binary concepts, it appears to be adequate, it works, and it appears to be adequate to most people to hear what amounts to them to be a secret, to hear a almost universal, cosmic kind of truth. That is, let's take my example again, do no evil to other people, do no ill to them, do no harm. And you go, oh, that's it. And you're convinced, all right, I'm on the right track. And then the very people who told you, the sources from whence you got the idea, when you say, well, how do you do it? They go, well, you can't. But you can suffer over not being able to, and if you do that, then welcome to the church. Welcome to Mother Church. Welcome to humanity. Welcome to a decent, civilized level of development. And that's it. You're not expected to do anymore. And if you push it, as we all know, then you've always had stories of, well, don't be all that frustrated. None of us can do it, but after we die, it'll all work out. After we die, it'll all come to fruition. But up until now, all you've got to do is feel adequately guilty and shameful over the fact that you can't do it now. But what I was pointing out was the kind of unrecognized oxymoronical glue holding, one of the glues holding things together, not just civilization. It does that, but it holds men's minds together and holds their consciousness at its ordinary level, is that once you accept that and feel guilty over not being able to do better, you won't do any better. The guilt, the shame, whatever it's called, but it amounts to that, somewhere between the two, the guilt, the shame, compensates for making effort. It becomes the substitute for being more conscious. You're surrounded by people who accept it. The person that you first look to, the organization, usually a church, they have the same attitude. And if you're an ordinary person, where are you going after that? Especially if you're fairly young, which is when most people do it. You don't think this way, but it's just the hierarchy of the wolf pack. The hierarchy of everything is such that how are you going to question your betters? How are you going to question the source, the man, or the organization? The source from which you got the piece of information you're seeking. That they say, well, here's the secret. Here is what's disturbing you, my child, my lad. I know what you're after. I've been through it myself, says the priest, the rabbi, the guru. I've been through it myself. Here it is. Here is what, just listen. Do no ill to another human. And you feel as though you have damn near been slain by the truth. And you go, yes. But then after you find out that he says that no one can do it, including him, what is an ordinary person to do? How are you going to question your betters? How are you going to question, seriously, the source of what is the only piece of real information you have ever seemed to have found? How are you then going to turn around and turn on it? You can't do both. And think at first, well, thanks be to all fate, thanks be to whatever powers there are that I found this, that I found this man, this organization, this information that gave me the key to the secret. How can I then turn on and go, wait a minute, this was the greatest day of my life, this was the greatest piece of luck, me finding this man, this information. How can I then turn on it and go, you fraud? The mind simply can't do both. And so normally you drift off, and that's the end of it. To try, without it being some minor cult, without it being some fairly loose-wired man or woman somewhere trying to round up a cult of people that he can have free sex with and get their money. And in other words, the thing about, well, our religion is anything goes and it doesn't make a damn. Remember, we're not counting that. So that's just the fringes of the parade. Not counting them, look at the small chance of anyone ever hearing what I'm calling tonight the mystical ideas. Because the mystical ideas start out, even if they told you that there is a secret. And if you said, well, I've been to church, or I talked to one guy and he said that the secret, or the key to the secret was not to do harm to anyone else. And you're addressing some mystic or mystical ideas, and they go, all right, that we may be able to use that, but wait a minute, let me say something first. And you go, okay, what? He goes, even if we accept that that is a workable basis, that may be, I'm not going to tell you yet, but that may be the very method that we use here. You go, I'm not saying that yet, because first I got to tell you this. You know that you can't do that right now. And you go, yeah, I know that. But and you suffer over it. Oh yeah, that's why I didn't give up the search. That's why I finally found you. And he goes, okay, first I got to tell you this. There was no reason to be ashamed. There was no reason to feel guilt about not being able to do it. And if you wait for them to understand that, I hope you've eaten recently or don't have to go to the bathroom. Because normally what you have is people's minds just wander off once they realize that there's some seriousness to this. And I could explain it in all sorts of apparently psychologically valid ways, and it's a waste of time. It doesn't actually mean anything. In other words, a quick description. one explanation, which is child's play, would be to say that they can't really accept that because they have been, up to whatever time it is, that they have spent 10, 20, 30 years feeling guilty over it, and suddenly run across you, or this, whoever I'm talking about, and they say, well, there's no need up to this point. There's no need for you to be feeling guilty or to be ashamed of not being able to do that. If for no other reason, they can now not turn on themselves and look at themselves as having wasted 30 years. As frustrating as it was, that they weren't completely satisfied, as witnessed by the fact in my story that they finally found another source. But for 30 years they have suffered over it, and for you to say, well, you shouldn't have done that. This is not the reason, and it's a pretty cheap description, but to many people they would think it sounds quite profound. I'm just trying to get you to see that it can be explained if it had to be. That's not the reason. But if you want to take that explanation and then think on your own and see the validity, see the reality behind it, it's that people can't suddenly, ordinary minds can't go, well, you're right. Or even if they don't know you're right yet, it's them to say, okay, I accept it. I've been suffering over this and feeling real guilty for 30 years. I never completely accepted it. I kept looking for somebody like you. But if you say that I shouldn't have felt that way, okay. It's like they have to take 30 years, a good part of the last 30 years, and to go, well, I was an idiot. I was a fool. Even though you didn't tell them that. You just say, well, there was nothing to be ashamed about. And your face was, so I wasted all that. Even if they don't say that. The point I'm trying to get you to see is that inside the essential structure of what humans are, it is a tricky thing to get someone to realize that unless you know that you can do something differently in you, then there is no way in which to judge, or there's no way in which to say that anything you have ever done internally, we're not talking about criminal behavior and killing people and hurting people, we're talking about the internal states, not your external activity, which we're still taking, I'm assuming I'm talking to reasonably middle-class, ordinary people by and large. And so we'll assume that you haven't done any more unthinkable, possibly criminal, prosecutable behaviors than anyone else, that you're just run-of-the-mill, John Q, keep it under the covers, questionable activity citizen. I'm talking about internal states. That for a person to feel as though, or for a person to have any idea that they could have been different, that they could have acted differently, you first off have got to see that up until the point that you realize that, you could not have acted differently. It is, and I realize that sentence got fairly obscure even for us, but it comes down again to make it refer back fairly simple to last time. It's considered just a big old chalkboard with a line down the middle, and consider on one side are things that are possible, and the other side are things that are impossible. And when it comes to the internal states, I feel sure that I will press on with this if you're interested in future tapings. But it is quite simple once you see it. How to fill up those columns. Internal states, forget external behavior. Internal states. What is possible regarding a man's internal states as he is? And what is impossible? And what is it that people suffer over? What is it that men immediately will accept guilt about? And what is it they fail to take into account? And to wrap it up, at least for tonight, I'll repeat my own story, that according to one legend, each man's final day of judgment, take the good old Judaic Christian, I assume you would anyway, that you've died and you wake up in the afterlife, and there you are up in the clouds, as Hollywood would have it, I guess. The kind of clouds around your feet, and you've got on a white robe of some kind, and there's this long line, just a God knows how many numbers, just going out of sight, and you can just barely make out these golden gates. And you make it look like an angel up there, somebody with a clipboard. And then some mignon comes by, a smaller angel, is coming down the line, he hands everybody, he says, all right, your time before the bar of judgment, we'll find, we'll get here sooner or later, but until then, and he hands you this little stone, he says, now just hold it in your hand. Now you got to do that, and hold that in your hand until you get up there. He didn't say anything, but that's the kind of thing people are used to nowadays. Take a number. It's just like, so you hold this stone. There you are by yourself, and you play. Anyway, you think, okay, and they hand you the stone. And he goes on to the next person. And through however time works in that great sphere, someday you end up going through the gate, they check off your name, and there you stand before the big guy, before the bar of ultimate judgment. They're going to review your life, find out what you know, what you've amounted to, how you progressed, etc. And they say, okay, you're so-and-so, yes. All right, we only have one question here, and so it's no big deal. It's just this one question, and then you'll be out of here one way or the other. Since you were out there and handed that stone, did you hold it in your hand all the time since you were given it until up till now? That is the beginning of understanding what is possible and what is not possible. That is the beginning of the only way in which a person should feel ashamed, or to feel any guilt. I'm just using those words. To feel accused. Because once you understand the difference between what is nominally possible, what is possible at your ordinary level, not because I say so, you've had a lifetime, or whatever age, to experience it, to realize what is possible and what is not possible. There's only one place to begin, where it's possible. And after that, once you realize it, and you realize how infrequently you remember that you're holding a stone, then it's up to you to accuse yourself. And when there's no one there to accuse you, that becomes a true dividing line between whether a man ever gets anywhere with this or not. Because people, it's very common for somebody to get involved with some mystical system somewhere and leave it and later complain about how overbearing, how harsh and demanding it was. They may have been in such a circumstance, but the more they say that, if they're telling the truth, the less of a real mystical environment they were in. Because when someone like, if you had any real potential, if they left, anybody leaves with that kind of complaint, the complaint is upside down. What was lacking was somebody to stay on their ass and accuse them. And they can call it mysticism and do that, but it's a damn religion. It's religious ideas. It's ideas that do not require that you execute them. They're just said, and you go, huh? And they go, can you do it? And you go, well, no. And they go, huh? But you're not expected to. It's only once a man knows what he can do, and then he wants to do it, then it's up to him to accuse himself. There is no one there to accuse you. Because if you don't do it, if you forget that you can hold a stone, if you forget that you can affect your internal state, nothing else, but if you forget that and you don't accuse yourself, there's nothing left. You end up being one of the old-timers hanging around the monastery. That first story I made up tonight, the guy said, well, if there's anything worse than these youngsters showing up that know it all, who in fact don't know enough that you can even talk to them yet, if there's anything worse than that, it's the guys been around the monastery here as long as I have, or all their life, and think they do know it all, and yet have now lost are so out of energy, just ordinary life energy, that they can't be told anything new. That is, they have forgotten that they can't remember. It's not all that bad, but it could be worse. Did it all get on?